Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If this is your first time with us, welcome. We're excited you're all here today for another episode of Cooking Connected. My name is Jordan. Joining me today is SNAP Ed educator Anna Sneltace and Master Gardener with the University of Minnesota Extension, Jamie Stang. So the Cooking Matters program is a collaboration between Share Our Strengths Cooking Matters program and the University of Minnesota Extension. Cooking Matters classes are either in-person or online classes. They are nutrition-based cooking classes that meet once a week for 2 hours for a total of 6 weeks. Classes feature a nutrition educator and a chef that work together to teach our participants about nutrition and how to make a healthy, delicious, affordable meal. So today we're going to follow that same format. Anna is going to be our chef, and Jamie is going to be our nutrition educator. And today we are going to be making refrigerated pickled vegetables. We'd like to thank foodhero.org for this recipe. And of course, just like every week, we do have another survey for you all to take. We love hearing from our viewers and we greatly appreciate that feedback. So if you could take our survey after this video, we'd sure appreciate it. As a reminder, you will need a program code for the survey, which we have posted both the program code and the survey link in the live chat, as well as the description box of our video. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's recipe. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Anna and Jamie. Thank you, ladies.
Great. Thank you, Jordan, and welcome everyone to this week's Cooking Connected. As Jordan mentioned, we are going to be making refrigerator pickled vegetables. So if you have that recipe in front of you, great. If not, you can look that up on foodhero.org. And today for this recipe, I'm going to get it started and then pass it over to Jamie to talk a little bit more about pickling and fermentation. So for our recipe today, you can use 3.5 to 4 cups of fresh vegetables. So what we're choosing to use today, we have green beans, we have cauliflower, and we have some little bell peppers. And then for spices, we will be needing 2 to 4 tablespoons. And today we are going to be using fresh garlic clove. We're going to be using celery seed and dill seed. So to get started, we are going to be starting over at the stove. And in our saucepan, we are going to be heating the vinegar, water, salt, and sugar. And you'll notice in the recipe notes that you can choose different liquids to use. We are choosing to use white vinegar today. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out the correct quantities. And for the recipe today, we're going to be using 2 quart jars. So I'm actually going to be doubling the recipe, as the recipe on paper is enough for 1 quart jar. So I'm going to be doing double. So on that note, we'll be doing 2 cups of vinegar. And then we will be doing 2 cups of water in there.
Anna, we do have a question from one of our viewers. What are the other types of vinegar you can use, and how would you decide between the different types of vinegar?
Yeah, so white vinegar would work, apple cider vinegar, white wine or rice vinegar. And I think it has a lot to do with your taste preferences. So I like the flavor that white vinegar gives to these, but it could be fun to experiment with different types of vinegar to see what kind that you like.
Great, thank you.
Then I'm going to finish this off by adding our salt. And then the last thing we need to add to our saucepan is our sugar. And this is optional.
I have another question from one of our viewers. What type of vegetables can you pickle?
You can pickle just about anything. So I showed what we have today. You could also do beets, other root vegetables, onions, broccoli, asparagus. It can really be a variety of things. All right. So I'm going to turn this on, give it a little stir, and we are going to be waiting for this to simmer. And while we do that, I am going to turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm going to share my screen and talk just a little bit about different kinds of pickling and preserving. And so can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So when we talk about pickling, and I'm just using garden produce as an example, as Anna said, you can pickle any variety of things, and you can see here just some of the examples. So today we're doing quick pickling, which is also called refrigerator pickling. I'll talk a little bit about water bath canning pickling, about fermenting, and then a few tips about determining if a recipe is safe and some common pickle issues. And there are also some handouts that you will be able to access if you have more questions. So quick pickles or refrigerator pickles are done in the refrigerator. They don't require canning of any type. They usually have a higher concentration of spices, vinegar, and or salt, and they're lower in sugar than traditional canned pickles would be. You can do them in any kind of a glass or a heavy plastic food safe container, but usually not in metal because the acid in the vinegar can react with the metal and it'll give it a metallic taste. And you can use screw top or hinged lids. They're fine. You can use other canning jar lids and just screw them on without processing them as well. Foods will keep several weeks to several months in the refrigerator. Usually it's recommended that you check them once a week for signs of spoilage. And that would be things if the vegetables get very, very soft. So if they will soften a little bit in the vinegar, but they should not be very, very soft. And they should not smell rotten. They should smell like a pickle. If a little bit of a white scum forms on the top, that's safe and it can be wiped off. That's just a process. Even when you put refrigerator pickles in the fridge, they still have a very slow fermentation process going on, and that's where the white scum will come from. But if it's moldy and fuzzy on top, you want to throw those pickles out. So when we decide what is safe to can and how to can it, we think about the acidity. Low acid foods have pH values that are high. So things like meat, seafood, poultry, dairy, and most vegetables are going to be higher acid foods. They either need a steam canner or you can do the refrigeration pickling method that we're doing today. If you have a lower pH food, so it's more acidic, things like fruit, most of the pickling recipes are going to be high acid. Sauerkraut, jelly, jam, fruit butters. These can be done at home using a water bath canner. And so oftentimes what you will do is if you're cooking things that are kind of on the borderline like tomatoes, you will add a little lemon juice, or you can get citric acid in any of the canning supply areas, or you can add a little vinegar to make them acidic. And that's especially true for tomatoes. So with tomatoes, if you're making a pint of tomatoes, you're going to add a tablespoon of lemon juice that's bottled, or you could add 2 tablespoons of vinegar or a 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid. And you can see that for a quart, you would just double those amounts of either lemon juice, vinegar, or citric acid. In Minnesota, we're at an altitude of about 1,000 to 2,000 feet. So when you're looking at a recipe to decide how long you should process something in a water bath canner or a pressure canner, that's the altitude that you use. And then one thing to keep in mind is if food is very, very thick, so something like pureed pumpkin does not can well at home because it may not get warm enough in the middle to be safe. And so pureed or mashed vegetables are generally not a good idea, but cut vegetables like we're using today are fine.
Jamie, we do have a question from one of our viewers, if that's all right.
Sure.
So one of our viewers had said that a lot of recipes that they've seen for canning, the recipe will say that they need to find perfect produce, so it can't have any like spots or anything on that. What's your definition of perfect produce? And if there's a spot on the pickle or on the cucumber, is that okay?
Yeah, so what they're generally concerned about in those cases are going to be molds. If a fruit or a vegetable might have a little soft spot on it, it may be more likely to have mold or bacteria. You can cut that off. The main thing would be to make sure that your brine is really hot when you put it on if you're making a refrigerator pickle, or that you can it for the appropriate amount of time if you're using a water bath or a steam canner. And so usually it's not going to be a problem as long as you've cut that part away and that you wash your produce very well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And so when you're canning, one thing that people are often concerned about is the texture and the color. And so you want to avoid soft or very hard water. So if you have, many of us have water softeners, we tend to not use softened water. You'll want to use water that's distilled or water that comes out of a purification system. If minerals are in hard water, it can make your beans and peas tough, or it can shrivel your pickles. And that's what causes a lot of the cloudiness, if you've ever seen cloudiness in homemade canned produce. You can use distilled bottled water if you want. It's usually better than chemically softened water, but if you have a choice, use soft water over hard water if those are your only two choices. With hard water, you can boil it for 15 minutes, and that will allow some of the calcium and magnesium, the hardness, to settle out. Now, when you're canning at home, if you have small jars, like the little half pints, you can stack them with a wire rack between them, but you don't want to stack them on top of each other so that one is sitting on the lid of the other, because that will interfere with your ability to make a seal. It is not safe to process jars in ovens, microwaves, or dishwashers because they just don't get hot enough. And there really are no powders that can replace heat processing if you're doing a canned product. Jars that have wire bale tops or that have glass caps, or those single piece porcelain zinc caps, are not recommended for pressure canning or water bath canning. They are fine for in the refrigerator. So if you can food and you have a few jars that don't seal, you can take the lid off. You throw the lid part away. You can keep the screw top. And you would use a new sterilized lid again after you've sterilized the jar. If you process your food again within 24 hours, you can use the same processing time. If you're not able to reprocess it within 24 hours, then you can store it in the refrigerator and eat it within about 4 days. And if you open any jars of food and they look spoiled, it's best not to use them. Even if you heat them up, there are some things like spores of botulism that can live there and that can have some effects, some health effects, including food poisoning and other issues. So spoiled food should always be thrown out. Now, when you're doing cucumber pickles, one of the things, the tricks to sort of getting a cucumber pickle that stays as crisp as you can is to keep the water temperature at 180 degrees. If it goes too high, it'll cause your pickles to get soft. Using canning or pickling salt is really important in any heat processed food. It is not as important in the refrigerator pickles. But if you're using something that's going to be heated in a water bath or a steam canner, it actually has some, the regular salt has some compounds in it that make the brine cloudy. It doesn't affect the flavor, but it does affect the way it looks. You can use white sugar, you can use brown sugar. Those are both fine for canning. Corn syrup and honey are generally not recommended. And then white distilled vinegar or cider vinegars are fine. Rice vinegar and balsamic vinegar can vary a lot. So if the label says that they have 5% acidity, they're fine to use. If you can't find the acidity level on that label, then we usually recommend using at least half distilled vinegar with those vinegars to make sure that you get the acid content where you want it. And then finally, some people really like to do fermented food. It can have a fair number of health benefits, and it's also kind of a unique way to preserve some of your produce. So for each 5 pounds of vegetables, you'll need about a gallon size container. You can use plastic or glass containers, and you can use stone crocks. Again, you wouldn't use metal. And if you're using a non-food grade plastic container, you can use a food bag that's food grade plastic. So the kinds that you might get to line your crock pot or to line a pan, those are fine, but don't use grocery bags, garbage bags, trash liners, or anything like that. And then fermenting in quart and half-gallon jars is safe. Sometimes you may get a little bit more spoilage in those because you can't put as much in. I personally find that for beginning fermenting, those are a really nice option because they ferment quicker, and it gives you, it's a good way to start out. Once you get into the gallon size or larger, the fermentation process can take a little bit more time. So when you ferment foods, you want to keep those vegetables under 1 to 2 inches of brine cover. So that it's always over the top of your vegetables. Otherwise, or your fruit, because otherwise it's going to put too much oxygen there, and you're more likely to get mold or to get soft fruit that will rot. If you're using a large container, you can take a small plate or a pie plate, and you can put it in that fits inside the opening of the jar. And you can put that over the top of your vegetables to keep them weighted down. And then you can fill quart bags or like the kind that you would freeze food in. You can fill those with water, 2 or 3 of those, put those on top, and that's a really nice way to weight your food down. You can also buy professional weights as well. And then if you're using clear food storage bags, you can add salt to that. One of the nice things about adding salt to the water is that it's going to be about the same level of salt as in your pickles. And in case your bag would develop a leak, it's not going to affect the final flavor of your pickles. And then finally, you take your fermented mixture and you cover it with a clean, heavy towel, and you put it somewhere in a dark, somewhat cool room. You want it about 65 to 75 degrees, and then check it every few days. If there's white scum on the top, you just wipe it off. And you check for bubbles. As long as you tap the jar and you see little bubbles coming up the side, that means it's still fermenting. Once you no longer see bubbles coming out of the jar when you tap it, that tells you that the fermentation is over and your product is ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie. We do have another question from one of our viewers about jar sterilization. Do you suggest always boiling your jars every time for jar sterilization?
That's kind of the typical way. Many of the dishwashers will have a cycle that you can run that's like a sanitized cycle, and you could do them in the dishwasher too if you're doing large batches. That's fine. The main thing is you just want to get that water up to at least 160 to 180 degrees to sterilize that jar.
Perfect. Thank you. How are we doing over there, Anna?
We're doing well. As Jamie was talking, I was starting to assemble the first jar of vegetables. And I transferred the liquid mixture off of the stove, so that is ready to go. So I added some garlic cloves in here, dill seed, celery seed, and the great thing with this is you could really use just about any seasoning that you have on hand to add to these pickled vegetables. And also, as Jamie was talking, I was just finishing cutting up the vegetables that we're using today. If you noticed, I cut the little bell peppers into half, so kind of nice bite-sized pieces. And then same with the cauliflower. So really up to you, kind of the size you would like, but a nice bite-sized piece is a good thing to aim for. So then if we take a look at the recipe again, it says to put the spices in the jar, which we did, and then add the vegetables in there and leave about a 1/2 inch space at the top of the jar. So I actually might put a few more in here. I have a little bit of room.
We do have a question for either Anna or Jamie. As far as packing the jars, are there any rules for packing the jars, or is it just put the vegetables in and don't worry?
Did you want to take that one, Anna, or should I?
You can go ahead.
Yeah, for the most part, you can pack the jars any way you want, like Anna is doing, where if you have mixed vegetables, you can pack them in, it doesn't have to be layered or anything. One of the main things to keep in mind, though, is that foods will rise naturally as they float, because they're a little bit lighter than the water. And so that's why we always allow that extra room. So the main thing is not to overpack a jar, to always, if they say to leave an inch of room, you definitely want to leave that inch of room so that your vegetables stay in the brine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Great, so now that this is packed and I have a little bit of room left at the top, I'm going to pour a mixture over. Want to make sure that it's submerged in brine. Oh. All right. And we're going to close up the jar. Then you can stick this in the refrigerator for, the recipe says 1 to 3 days, and this will allow all those flavors and the seasonings to really soak into the vegetables. And then they will be ready to eat. And these should be always stored in the jars, only in the refrigerator, and can be consumed within 3 months of making.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. There we go. All right. Well, thank you again, Anna and Jamie, for joining us today on another episode of Cooking Connected. We greatly appreciate your expertise. And what a beautiful recipe. Kind of nice to learn how to pickle after all of our gardens this summer. So again, we greatly appreciate you all joining us. With that, we can go ahead and let you go. We will have another episode of Cooking Connected next Thursday, same time, same place. So next Thursday at 2 p.m. And please don't forget to take our survey. Again, we have posted that in the live chat as well as the description box of our video. Also, Jamie has shared some home preservation tips with us, some great resources. Again, we have posted those in the live chat and they are also in the comments section. So please check out those great resources Jamie has shared with us for more food preservation tips. So with that, we'll let you go. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great day.